It's Bill Nissen again. I've been talking about issues with relating Jesus to people, and we've been talking about the two commandments. And I've already given you a lot of my heart on the first commandment and why it's first. If we don't have an intimate, personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that's not some doctrinal position. It's an experiential reality that I know Him, I walk with Him, I sense Him, I speak to Him, I hear from Him, and you can watch the other video to kind of get my heart on that. But the two commandments are inseparable. You can't do the first commandment without doing the second commandment. And if you're doing the second commandment without the first, then you're not doing the second commandment. You're just having a social club. Because the two commandments are to love the Lord thy God with all their heart, soul, and strength. And the second commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. That later was trumped. He's saying, I'm going to give you a new commandment, and that is to love one another as Christ has loved the church. So, those two commandments are inseparable. But it's funny, when we look at loving one another, you know, there's a verse that I've heard quoted where it says, they will know you're my disciples by your love for one another. And so then you see people read that and say, so what we can do to evangelize the world, to impact the world so that they'll really want to be like us is, let's go have a picnic. And they're going to see us get along, and they're going to see us, love one another, and then they're going to want to become Christians. And it's just kind of funny when you describe it, because the reality is I've been around a lot of groups. For instance, I was a bouncer in a biker bar before I came to the Lord back in Minneapolis, back in the mid-'80s, and there were these really rough, bikers. Their skin was green with tattoos, and everybody was afraid of them, and they were rough. I remember one time I was working at the bar, and this guy in a what they call a rice burner, it's like a Kawasaki, one of those, instead of a hog, instead of a Harley, comes into the bar. And so the bartender and I start talking to him, and he takes off, his helmet, and he's got those, bright colored leathers. And all of a sudden the bar's empty, and all the Harley guys are outside. We didn't notice this until it was too late, and we're gone, but they dismantled this guy's bike. Just dismantled it into pieces, and people were scared of these guys because they'd do stuff like that. They carried knives and carried guns. Rough group. But you know what? Whenever they'd see one another, they'd give each other big hugs and and kiss them on the neck sometimes, and just high fives, and they loved one another. But I don't want to join that group. And that's no offense to any Harley riders there. I'm just talking about, this was a scary group. Yeah, I needed help with these guys if they ever got out of line. Okay, so that's not what Jesus is talking about, I don't think. And so I think it comes also in line with something else he also says is pray for those who persecute you. Is, if we can love one another, meaning love others, that's something that you don't see. You see people love others that are similar to them, familiar to their line of doctrine or their line of beliefs, or their social etiquette. But to love others that, quite frankly, are your enemies. And he says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. How in the world do you do that? Well, it's not because you're going to get anything out of it. It's not because you're doing it to make some kind of a point. It's got to be a real deal. It's like, I have a love for them, even though they're wicked, even though they're mean, even though they hurt me, even though they damage me, and that can get really hard to talk about because it sounds beautiful. You can put it embroidered on a pillow or something, but you're talking about something that's otherworldly, because we're talking about somebody who may have done damage to your family or to your kids or to other things, and to be able to have a love for them, that's crazy. But I've experienced that, so I know it's true. And so I don't think they're going to be drawn to us because we're having a picnic. They have picnics. tax gatherers, in Jesus' time, they got along and had parties and had a good time. That's not what's going to draw them. What's going to draw them is this affection, this love for one another that goes beyond us getting along. It's something that's deeply embedded in the fact that we know Him, the first commandment. And so, because it's something I joked about, as I would speak at our church for years, is I'd say, it says love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, but sometimes the hardest part is loving those that are in your group, your family, your siblings. And I would say this about people in the congregation. I go, there's some of you in the group here that I drive you nuts. And I'll just tell you right now, there's some of you that drive me nuts, just with your idiosyncrasies and whatnot. But I love you, and it's a connection that we have because of this deep embedded belonging to Christ, not because we agree with one another, because it goes beyond just that group. I've found that with people that are my enemies. Not all of my enemies yet, but I'm working on it. But I've experienced it, that this loving others, loving God and loving others, is an otherworldly thing that we cannot do without having an intimate, interactive relationship with Jesus Christ. So I know I've kind of talked around it, but it's not just familiarity and affiliation. It's oneness, because we're in Him. So think about it. We'll talk more about it later.